Everybody, and welcome to the 17-minute talk. Let us briefly swing our camera back to the Second World War. The Second World War is just peaking. Germany seems to already have the bomb, the atom bomb. And America thought that if Germany has the bomb, they will win the war. Because war will be won by anybody who's more powerful, not more virtuous. So they quickly put the Manhattan Project together and in a very short period of time managed to create an atom bomb, tested in the deserts of New Mexico, and decided to bring the war to an end by dropping two of them in Japan on 6th of August and 9th of August. The Japan is quite completely destroyed. In fact, so completely destroyed, the youth is gone, the industry is gone, all that they have no resources of their own. But together as a nation, they decide, given the Bushido Code, that we will be second to none. That we will be, in the 1950s, world leaders in the domain of textiles. And the whole nation came together. All kind of infrastructural requirements came together in what they call the Kairetsu. And by the time the 1950s are out, Japan is the world's largest manufacturer of textile products. In the 1960s, they decided to be the world's largest manufacturers of steel. Now, you know this is a ridiculous goal. It's a mad or a crazy goal because Japan does not have even a spoonful of iron ore, no coal. And yet, it managed to import a lot of it from Australia, from Indonesia, some from India, and in that process managed to become world leaders in the manufacture of textiles. Not United States, not any other country in the world. Japan was making 60 million tons of steel in the 1960s. 60 million tons is a lot of steel. To give you an idea, if I were to take the 2007 statistics reported in The Economist, the world's largest manufacturer of steel is China, making about 720 million tons. The second largest manufacturer of steel is still Japan, 110 million tons. Third is United States, 98 million tons. Fourth is South Korea, 63 million tons. Fifth is India, ranging between 43 to 46 million tons. In 2007, what Japan had managed in the 1960s was 60 million tons. It was an incredible goal. In the 70s, they decided to be the world's largest manufacturer of automobiles. Missed the target by 1 year. And yet in 1981, Toyota was the largest selling car in the world. In the 1980s, Japan was making 11 million cars, 11 million vehicles on the road. The United States was making only 8 million. In the 1980s, they decided to be the world's largest manufacturers of electronic items and goods. And they were. If you look at the 4 decades, which are golden decades for Japan, incredible success. A nation that had been war-torn and devastated completely went on to become the second largest economy in the world right up to 2010. Today is the 4th largest economy, but still a very, very powerful economy in the world. How did they manage this? If you do think about, in the 1950s, I'm going to use this whiteboard, in the 1950s, Japan decided, let us manufacture and grow in the domain of textiles. Now, before the textile begins to dip, they have proactively decided to start something else. And that is, let's get into the manufacture of steel. Let's get into the manufacture of automobiles. Let's get into the manufacture of electronic items. So Japan is progressively shifting gears quite completely. It is not saying this is my core competence, I must need to do more and more of this to become the best in the world. They're saying what we are here, we will maintain this position. But we can see in an environment of change and complexity, value is migrating to something else. For example, as a consequence of the Second World War, Japan is destroyed, Southeast Asia is destroyed, Eastern and Western Europe is destroyed. For the reconstruction, you would have required steel. Steel is going to be at a premium. Even if we don't have iron ore, we don't have coal, we have the human will. We have flexibility, we have dexterity. We will move away from the manufacture of textile. We will maintain parity, but we will move away into the manufacture of steel. And we see as value migrates to something else, we will move into the manufacture of automobiles. I will move into the manufacture of electronic goods. What they are saying is as value migrates, we will chase the value proactively. And this is interesting, that generally a product life cycle begins and then begins to collapse. So there is initiation, there is growth, there is maturity, there is decline. And they're saying even before decline in this starts, we will start something else. Because we will use our vision, we will use our predictive analytics to say what should be the next level, what is the next value the globe is going to migrate to, let us get into that. You don't have a sinusoidal curve. In fact, all of human history, All of human life is a sinusoidal curve, no matter what you see. But you can fracture the sinusoidal curve to become a sigmoid curve. A sigmoid curve is the one that's not allowed to collapse. Friedrich Nietzsche used to say, the best way to walk amongst the mountains is from peak to peak. But for that, you need long legs. What are they really doing? They are looking at the curve. Long before it begins to collapse, they're saying, what can I get into and make the next curve? So I am going to get it at point A, and before I hit point B, I have hit another trajectory of growth. I'm not going to be trapped by my core competence. If I hold on to my core competence, it will become my core incompetence. Which means, at this point of time, let's try and analyze the psychology of the organizational leadership at this point of time. Here you have time. Here you say you have performance or growth. At point A, the organization is saying, we are doing very well. We are leaders in the world. We are leaders in our own country. The best practices are about from us. Case studies get written on us. Let us not fix anything. Let us not deviate our resources. In fact, we must stay with what will give us maximum productivity and outcome. But a creative organization, an agile organization, is already proactively thinking, saying that this wave is going to collapse sooner than later. Value is migrating to another one. Let me proactively. At this point, the logic for creating and getting into the new product doesn't exist. Therefore, this whole space is the space of paradox, where you are going to invest your resources in something that is not yet tried and tested. The whole argument is, this is what we are good at, let's carry on doing it. But by the time you do this is paradoxical. So by the time this is collapsing, you're already taking off. At point B, because this wave is collapsing, the leadership from this is losing credibility, losing market share. The solutions are not that good anymore. No matter what they do, it is headed down. This leadership is not the leadership for the next wave. The leadership for the next wave is very different. Has very different abilities and competencies and capabilities. For example, those people who did the textiles cannot be the people who do the steel. Those people who do the steel cannot be the people who do automobiles. They have to be very different. Internal agility requires first recognizing where value is migrating. What is the new definition of a leader? A leader is someone who continuously chases and harvests perpetually vanishing arbitrage. All opportunities are perpetually closing windows. Japan had a 10-year vision and mission for textiles, 10 years for automobiles, 10 years and 10 years. If you were to collapse the 10 years into a shorter period of time, you can actually see the industry rise and collapse in front of your eyes, and you must shift gears before it collapses. If you think about an environment of change and complexity, on the x-axis you put time. On the y-axis, you can put, say, how has technology evolved as time has passed? And I can look at 1600 years, 1800 years, and of course 2000 years. How has technology evolved as time has passed? The graph is actually an exponential one. For the first many years, there's not much change. And yet in the 20th century, especially, the change is very rapid. If I were to replace speed of travel, or use speed of travel as a proxy for technological evolution, speed of travel, you would notice in this period you traveled on horseback, etc. Then you hit the steam engine, and then you hit flight. When you travel today from anywhere to anywhere by flight, you travel at 900 kilometers per hour, 40,000 feet above ground level. I can replace that with growth. I'll put any other parameter there. I would notice that at time T1, I am here. Say I'm the leader in the market. I'm doing extremely well. I'm in the first curve. I'm about to peak. And I'm saying there's no need to fix anything if it's not broken. I said there is a lot of opportunity here. Let us create and harvest this opportunity. I'm trapped in the logic bubble of what I think is leadership and of what I can maintain. At time T2, you have moved here, but the market has moved there, which means you've fallen behind the market by that much. Which means simply by maintaining and being where you are and doing what you are to the best of your ability, you're falling behind. So if you're not progressing, you're regressing. If you're not growing, you're decaying. If you're not becoming better, you're becoming worse. That's the logic of the larger organization. In fact, agility at an individual level, agility at an organizational level, agility at the level of nations has a similar logic and a similar trajectory. What Japan managed to do and demonstrate to us in the sigmoid curve is an ability to proactively look at where value is migrating and what we can do to shift from that. Once you have captured where value is migrating, now you need to, in a very significant way, figure out, given this new context and environment, what opportunities exist in the environment to be harvested. What threats exist in the future environment that I need to mitigate, which means my entire scenario planning, my risk management ability for threats in the future, opportunities in the future to be harvested. If I'm going to do that, then in the present, I will need to build capabilities, technical, functional, behavioral capabilities that allows me to harvest opportunities in the future, that allows me to make steel. World's best quality steel, still exported to different parts of the world, have import costs added to it and still make a profit. What capabilities do I need to do that? While I'm having capabilities, the organization must have a culture that reinforces the capabilities that you are doing. If you're trying to say collaborate, teamwork, work with each other, include, but you're rewarding individual performance, at some level, the culture you're building and the capabilities you're building are at dissonance. The culture will tend to cannibalize the capability you want to build. And of course, in an environment of change and complexity, one of the more important capabilities is entrepreneurial orientation. Central to agility is entrepreneurial orientation. So you have an external world that is changing very fast, so you need to adapt externally and integrate internally. If you have to adapt externally and integrate internally, then you are creating a dynamic equilibrium where you're communicating and realizing what's happening in the external environment and what you can do to bring those pieces of information and knowledge inside the organization. And how will you do that? So organizational leadership is standing here. And it is saying, I know who we are. I know which markets we exist in. We know what strengths we have, what capabilities we have. If we all align, if we all manage to put all our efforts together, if we really stretch, if we do everything right and well, it is possible to stretch and achieve that vision. So organizational leaders create a particular vision they want the organization to propel itself towards. But the vision's legitimacy comes from internal capabilities. Its legitimacy comes from deciphering the opportunities in the environment which they will harvest and threats in the environment which they mitigate. And this they do through a very robust performance management system. So you have a vision, like Christ had a vision. When he said, no more violence, no more revenge, forgive, forget, love thy neighbor, don't worry about revenge. There's a paradigm shift. In the ancient world, you had war, you had revenge as a very strong behavior, as something that was reinforced as socially legitimate. Here he's shifting that paradigm. When people bought into that vision, they had the mission to want to spread this vision everywhere else in the world. So they went about in different places of the world, they were called missionaries. When the missionaries spread this around, 18th century, I think an 18th century sociologist called Max Weber went ahead and kind of looked at the church and said, it is one of the strongest, longest surviving multinational corporations in the world. If you look at what the church does, how it embeds into the community, how it serves the community, that it has a vision, that it has a mission, and it has values that it must follow. So although the church will go to different environments and do different things, the vision, values, and the mission that it has is not changing. Your vision about the future, at least for that decade, is not changing. And the values that will get there is not changing. Even though you create dexterity and flexibility internal to the organization by developing different levels and kinds of capability, your vision is not really changing. Your values are not changing. You're anchored in those values. So when you have a vision, you create a mission, you create a 5-year strategic plan, you create an annual strategic plan, then you create a function or a vertical plan, and that kind of breaks down into individual KRAs and KPIs. This is very commonsensical and it is known to everybody. But this is the one that has to be dynamic. And learnings that you absorb from the external environment and looking at what opportunities exist in the external environment, you bring all those together and create internal capability to achieve vision and create internal agility. As to how exactly it will get done, I think from the various themes that are lined up for today's speech, you will get a good amount of ideas on how that can be done. Thank you.